Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well and thank you as always for being here. In this episode, we are going to be reviewing the Miami Grand Prix, and what a race it was. We saw Lando Norris finally get his maiden Formula One win. We're going to be talking about how he was able to achieve that. Did he achieve it on merit, or was there a bit of luck to it? Other incidents including the battles between Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz, where it went wrong for Max Verstappen and Red Bull, and of course, it seems these days we can't go an entire episode without talking about Kevin Magnussen's antics and more penalties, but we're going to be talking about all the other stories at the rear end of the field as well. But joining me on this episode to talk about that and more, we've got Courtney Pine joining us once again. Courtney, thanks for coming on as always. How are you, mate?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be back, and what a time to be here. I think we've all been waiting a very long time for Lando to get his first win. I won't go on a monologue. I want to save it for the actual episode. But yes, very, very happy with what we saw last night.
Yeah, me too. And of course, we're talking about Lando Norris winning his first Formula One race of his career. He is finally shaken off that tag of being F1's nearly man, and of course the record that he used to have of being the driver that had the most podiums in his career without a race win. So congratulations, of course, are in order to Nick Heifeld. He has now retaken that record by default, that Lando can no longer qualify for that. So I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that as well. But before we get into the race review, as usual on this podcast, as part of the new protocol this season, we like to reward our generous Patreons for their support, and of course that comes in the form of 5-star reviews. And in each episode, we like to read out a review at random and pay tribute to them for their support. And in this episode, we have got a 5-star review from 88 Gaffers on Apple Podcasts, and he writes, top podcast, genuinely good down-to-earth podcast, just some fans of the sport with very in-depth knowledge talking about the sport they love. As an avid fan, but not an anorak of the sport, I love that these guys are always seeming to answer the questions I have in my head and talk about them in a very easygoing way where I can keep up and learn a few things at the same time. I'd highly recommend. So thank you so much for the kind words, 88 Gaffers, and of course the 5-star review as well. If you want a 5-star review read out in dedication to you on a future podcast, guys, make sure to leave us one on your favourite pod platform, preferably Spotify or Apple Podcast if you can. Those are the ones that we usually get the most of. So if you could do that, that would be really, really helpful. It helps get the show out to more wonderful people like yourselves and helps grow the DNF1 community. So please do leave us a 5-star review if you think that we are worthy of one. So Courtney, now that we've got all the formalities out of the way, Lando Norris, first win of his Formula One career. Sum up, if you can, as a fan, how good that feels to not only say that, but hear that as well. It's been a long time coming.
I think it's not only a great story for Lando, his fans. I think it's a great moment for Formula One. I'm not going to go down the usual route and make it negative. The things I've been complaining about over the past 2 years, I've been very vocal about. You can go back to multiple episodes of me complaining about what's been wrong with F1 over the last few years. But this has been really refreshing. Just fantastic for Lando, fantastic for the sport. And in my time following Formula One, well over 20, 25 years now, I've never known such a popular winner. You know, so many people have been happy for Lando. You haven't seen many people begrudging him the win. There are some that are saying that there might have been a little bit of luck involved, but overall, so many people are happy for him, and I just hope this gives Lando the confidence to go on and battle for a world championship, because we've known of the great potential that Lando's had for many, many years now, since he's a teenager. And I just hope that with the changes coming from some of the top teams, this might give the likes of Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, some of these young talents that haven't really had the chance to showcase what they're really capable of. I'm really hoping over the next few years we get to see some great battles within this latest generation, because we've yet to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, all of the accolades that came with that, it's always wonderful to see a new winner in Formula One. I think the last new winner that we had, we'd have to go back to 2022, I think it was, when George Russell won in Brazil. And Yeah, Lando Norris joining the latest list of British winners, the 21st British driver to win a race in Formula One. Believe it or not, given how long it's been since George Russell won, is this the first time we've had the British national anthem played under the new rendition for King Charles? Or was played, or was it George Russell?
I believe it was George Russell. Lewis was the last for Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, in that case, then, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. 'Cause I'm trying to remember my history, how long ago that was. But as I said, we haven't heard the British national anthem very often in Formula One of late. So it's nice for that one to come back. We even had a lot of fans asking why it was only played once, not twice, when you get both national anthems of constructor and driver. But in the case of McLaren and Lando, both team and driver are technically British. I know some people say, oh, well, McLaren was technically New Zealand because Bruce McLaren's from New Zealand. Well, so, yeah, I know, but it's the manufacturer, not the team owner or the team founder, if you like. So that's why it was only played once. You're not going to play the same national anthem twice, I'm sure. A lot of fans
I'm all for it.
Well, we've had the Dutch and Austrian national anthem played a lot over the last couple of years. I'm sure some people wouldn't have minded if we had the British national anthem played twice. But nonetheless, a nice sight for the British fans to see. And yeah, as I was saying, it's always wonderful to see a new driver win a Formula One race. And I think Lando Norris, as you rightly pointed out, Courtney, a very popular winner. I know he's not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm sure people have their reasons for that, and that's fine. But it was just so refreshing to see a driver full of all that emotion and joy and the jubilation that came with that. And there was so much goodwill and happiness from everybody. I can't think of anybody in the paddock that came across Lando, whether it be Max or Charles Leclerc or Lewis or George or Oscar or Carlos or anybody. There was not one person that wasn't beaming with joy to see Lando Norris so happy and celebrating that win.
No, it's again, it's a testament to the impact the lad has had on the sport. I remember we were talking about this during lockdown. Lando Norris was one of the sort of main figureheads who sort of like creating content for us when we was all bored at home. He's done so much to engage with the general audience. He very much epitomises the latest generation of Formula One drivers. Obviously, some of the older fans won't appreciate that. Some of the fans just think the drivers should just appear on the track before and after the race. None of the social media stuff. But for particularly the younger fans, I think Lando Norris has really captured a lot of hearts. I was saying it the other day about Ayrton Senna. Now, I don't want to be drawing comparisons. I think Lando's got a very long way to go in his career. But in terms of general, catching the hearts of people, I think Lando has done a fantastic job of that, particularly with the younger fans. So I think it shows. It shows how many people have been happy with Lando's win. But I want to see more now. I want to see Lando compete for a championship. Obviously, that's going to take a lot of work from McLaren. Are they capable? I think so in the long term, particularly with the regulation changes coming up. But I think now we're hoping to go again into this era of seeing this next generation of drivers, because I think it'll do so much good for Formula One. It has gone through a stale spell, so I'm just hoping that this win from Lando sort of energises and makes F1 the sport that we all know and love.
Well, I said this last night on social media after I finished watching the race, and you do get in sport times and eras that are often dominated by one entity, or in this case one person, to such a degree it puts off so many fans of the sport to the point where it's really hard to see past that and see that light at the end of the tunnel. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting here that Max Verstappen in particular is ruining the sport in any way. I think actually he's grown into that superstar figure that I think at the moment only exists for a few people in the sport, like Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso, and you can chuck in people like Charles Leclerc as well into that to a degree. Obviously, I'm not saying that Max has the same level of superstardom as Lewis. That'd be ridiculous, but it is growing into that global stardom, I suppose, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it does help transcend beyond Formula One. I think that's just the nature of the modern age of sport. And as a result of that, sometimes you do get fans that just don't want to watch the sport, or there's no reason to enjoy it, or you get people that don't follow it and say, why do you guys put in all that time and hours to watch something where you know who's going to win at the end of it, and it's usually the same guy and it's not exciting? But every now and then, in those eras, you get a day like we had at Miami, where it can be the smallest thing. And it was a race that, there was always the potential for something to happen. And then it does with the incident between Magnussen and Logan Sargent, which brings out the safety car. And then all the right circumstances fall into place. All the stars align for a moment like that. And it culminated in this release of pressure, this euphoria, this joy, this, unlocked potential that we were all going to question regarding a driver who we all support, who we all really want to see do well, who it hasn't really happened for, and it all culminates into this one amazing moment, and that's what makes it all worth it. Mm-hmm. It really does. Not even just as a fan of Formula One, a fan of sport in general, because it has the potential to have those moments every now and then. That's what makes them so special. And of course, if they happened week in, week out, it wouldn't be as special. We'd love to see crazy races week in, week out, but if they happen so frequently, it wouldn't be as special. So, that's kind of what it's all about. Not to, dramatize this more than perhaps I am, but yeah, it was just a wonderful thing to see. We got a lot of questions on the race itself, Courtney, how Lando Norris came about, and of course, we cannot ignore the obvious factor in this race, and that was the safety car, which proved to be the turning point for Lando and obviously gave him track position to try and win the race. The question we got from a lot of you guys was fairly simple. Would Lando Norris have won the race without the safety car? What do you reckon, Courtney? Is it as simple as that?
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of talk about how the safety car procedure went about. Not the first time we've been here, But this is how I think it will have turned out. I think if the safety car procedure had been done correctly, I feel that Lando would have been in the mix for the race win. But that Red Bull has such impressive straight line speed. I do think it would have been difficult for Lando to get past Max. We saw how he did struggle. He's clearly faster than Perez. But they just didn't have the straight line speed to get past the Red Bull. So it could have been difficult for Lando to get past Max. But we've seen this happen in Formula One so many times. The safety car does sometimes add to the spectacle. Sometimes because it throws the strategy completely out of the window. It's all a part of it. So you win some, you lose some. We've seen some pretty serious safety car results from a safety car, which I won't go into. But this one, again, it has created a feel-good buzz around the paddock. And even judging by Max, Max has won so many races. He has a healthy gap in the championship battle. So he isn't obviously going to be too aggrieved to finish second on this occasion, but he didn't seem too annoyed by what happened. He wasn't happy with how the car was performing. We saw a couple of shaky moments from Max, very rare shaky moments from Max. He hasn't been happy with the car all weekend. So I do think on this weekend, I'm not going to get too carried away just yet. The McLaren did have very good race pace, but it's just a characteristics of the Red Bull, which might have made it difficult for Lando to pass Max if the safety car procedure had happened differently.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And, when you ask that question, is it as simple as saying Lando would he have won if the safety car hadn't came out? I think the simple answer is he probably wouldn't have done. Because if he'd have made an all-pit stop, and the intention, of course, was for him to stay out as long as possible, because the tyre degradation wasn't really a factor at this circuit. It was more a case of the graining issue. Don't open up the tyre compounds too much where you lose performance. We saw medium runners trying to go nearly 30 laps on those mediums, and Lando was still setting the fastest lap of the race, so we know the pace was there. It's just a case of managing the tyres so you can prolong that stint. Eventually the safety car does come out, and if it doesn't, Lando's probably ending up around where Carlos Sainz is, behind his teammate Oscar Piastri in 5th place or something like that, maybe just ahead of Perez, because Perez was kind of a bit out of sync with that earlier pit stop, and obviously wasn't able to manage the tyres himself, which was an interesting story in its own right. But no, I don't think Lando wins the race if there's no safety car. I think at best, probably gets on the podium, maybe clears his teammate in Carlos and is challenging Leclerc and Verstappen towards the end. But no, I don't think he wins the race if there's a safety car. The fact is, because we had the safety car, I think the part that not a lot of people were talking about on the broadcast, which you alluded to already, Courtney, which is really strange, is the fact that the safety car procedure was a complete mess. I mean, Lando comes out, and the safety car lets Lando go, who the leader is, but then picks up Verstappen as the leader himself. And people will say, oh, well, does it really matter because they all got to go to an agreed delta? Well, no, it does matter, because the safety car is always going to go slower than the delta time. The delta time that you have to be mandated to follow in order to make sure you're not going too fast. But it has to be faster than what the safety car is doing, because the whole point of the safety car is to bunch the pack up. So if the delta wasn't quicker, the guys at the back are never going to catch the safety car. That's the point of it. So while Lando was sticking to the delta, everyone else behind him was stuck behind the safety car. So Lando effectively ended up inheriting the lead of the race because he was able to build a larger gap than he should have done and ended up in the lead of the race. If he doesn't have to do that and he's stuck behind the safety car, or they pick him up first or whatever, or everyone goes through the safety car and not gets picked up until Lando comes around again, chances are, Courtney, he probably comes out behind Leclerc and Verstappen. And then that's a different situation altogether. He does have the fresher tyres. He had a very fast car. Max as well had floor damage, which obviously, you know, as a result of running over that cone, which is a factor. And I think he probably could still win that race from that position. It would have been much tougher for him. And he could have got Leclerc, because we saw Piastri had the pace to pass Leclerc in the DRS. Whether he has the pace to beat Max in the DRS, different issue. Struggled to get past the other Red Bull, so there's no reason for assuming that he'd have an easier time passing Max. If anything, it'd probably be tougher. As I said, all ifs and buts and maybes, but at the end of the day, it doesn't take anything away from what Lando has achieved, because how many races have we seen, Courtney, in F1 where something happens that's out of the ordinary, someone's going to benefit from it? It's more. It's not necessarily about being in the position to benefit from a situation like that, which of course is important, but it's also more importantly about making sure you consolidate that. And how many times has Lando Norris been in a position where he's had the opportunity to win a Grand Prix and he hasn't been able to deliver on that? Even though that's a tag that's been thrown at him, I would argue not hardly any at all. People say Sochi, but I would argue, well, that was a crazy circumstance that would either gone his way or gone against him. It was just a toss of a coin and it went against him, where it went in Lewis's favour because of the strategic change Mercedes made. But I can't really think of one. Maybe the sprint in Qatar, like last year. But other than that, is it, you know, so no, yes, I think it's true that he wouldn't have won the race without the safety car, but I don't think he won the race because of the safety car only. You know, he still had to do that himself, and he did it.
Well, look, you touched on it yourself. The fact that Lando stayed out, that was a strategic play. Because let's be honest, most drivers do this at some point in the race. They take a gamble based on the possibility of there being a safety car, and that's exactly what McLaren did by keeping Lando out, and it paid off. On other days, it might have gone completely wrong for him, but that is all of the part. That's all a part of the sporting spectacle. And that's what the strategists are there to. That's what they're employed to do. They're employed to take the gambles every now and again. Because unfortunately for Lando, he was down in fifth. We know they had the pace. Miami isn't the easiest circuit to overtake on. I must say though, on a slight tangent, that's definitely the best Miami Grand Prix we've had. I've been very critical of Miami over the past 3 years, but that's definitely been the best we've had so far. But yeah, usually it's difficult to overtake on that circuit. So they had to take a gamble. As I said, on other days, it probably wouldn't have paid off, but it worked out for them this time. And are we going to begrudge somebody like Lando, who's been robbed on so many occasions by very similar circumstances?
No, absolutely not. Wouldn't even dream of doing it. We should talk about a few other drivers in this case. Obviously, Lando did an incredible job. Michelle Carmichael asked us about Max Verstappen, and she asked if Max had not had the floor damage and he was able to have a similar tyre life to Norris, could he have won this race? I mean, Max. Again, it's another scenario like if everything's sort of equal. I think what we know is that the McLaren upgrades worked an absolute treat for Lando. It put him in a position where he arguably had the fastest car this weekend, or at least on Sunday, but he was just never in a position to really maximise that until the second half of the race when he took the lead. And we saw him just drive off into the distance. I think the floor damage is quite pivotal for Max in terms of his capability of winning the Grand Prix, despite the tyre deficit that obviously he had to Lando, which obviously would have played a factor as well. But to be honest, Courtney, even if he didn't have that floor damage, the earlier parts of the race when he was ahead of Piastri and in the sprint with Leclerc and obviously the second stint with Leclerc as well, Max wasn't exactly galloping off into the distance ahead of the Ferrari or the other McLaren. So In my opinion, I think if all things are considered equal, I think you could argue that Lando would have probably still won that race, assuming that he'd have kept it all together with a much smaller gap to Verstappen.
Yeah, I agree. He would have won. The gap would definitely have been smaller. It'd have been a lot more stressful for Lando and his fans. But no, again, I completely agree. Max wasn't comfortable with the car. He was complaining about it all weekend. And again, he made that mistake, which is very, very rare. So it shows that he wasn't happy with the balance of the car, again, which is very rare. So again, Adam, you said it yourself. Sometimes the stars align, and this is exactly what's happened. Do I think that do I think that Red Bull are all of a sudden, really struggling? No, I do not. I'm not going to be deluded in that sense, but I do think moving forward, it might not be as much as a runaway for Red Bull as we've seen over the past couple of years. Maybe this is me taking a big dose of copium. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And of course, Max Verstappen was asked about this in the drivers' press conference after the race. And I must say, massive respect to Max, because this would have been a very uncomfortable and difficult position to be in. Of course, he was absolutely delighted that one of his closest friends was able to get their first win in Formula One. He knows that feeling all too well and has done it many times throughout his F1 career. So to see his friend do that was obviously great for him. And they were asking him all those questions, and I love the response that he came out with, Courtney. I don't know if you saw this, but one reporter was asking Max, would Lando have won without a safety car in this race? He basically said, well, if my mum had balls, she'd be my dad. And I think that's, as hilarious as that is, that's exactly the sort of attitude that you would want to hear or to see from Max Verstappen, because that would have been a very easy question for him to answer incorrectly and say, oh, well, this happened, it just wasn't my day. And then people just go after him and say, oh, he's sport, he's used to winning week in, week out, boring people, and now someone else wins, he doesn't like it. So, no, fair play to Max. He answered that in the best possible answer he could have given for that one. So, no, good stuff from him. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that, Courtney. It's a case, as we've said already, things happen in sport. That's what we love about it. Anything can happen, and as Murray Walker put it, so often it usually does. So, yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. Sometimes it's your day, and sometimes, as Max experienced at this weekend, it just wasn't his day. But there was always that threat of that with Verstappen. As I said, he never ran away with the competition. He almost surprised himself getting pole in not only the sprint, but the main race, because the pace of that Red Bull, as almighty as it has been, it just wasn't really there compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting moving on. Obviously, the big news coming this weekend about Adrian Newey and his influence within the team. Obviously, there are a lot of great minds within that Red Bull team. We saw the personnel changes towards the end of 2020 to 2021 that catapulted this team to where it is today. But it's going to be interesting how the dynamic changes, let's say, at Red Bull. Don't worry, Adam, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But it's going to be interesting. This is just a hypothetical thought. It's going to be very interesting to see how the abrupt dynamic changes at Red Bull could start affecting the team and the ability to get to that peak performance that they've been able to do over the past year or so. Are we going to see occasions like this more often, where obviously they're going to always be quick, the car is there, but are they going to more often than not, are they going to struggle to find that peak performance because of all the distractions that have been going on lately?
Yeah, absolutely. It will definitely be one to keep an eye on. Next question we got on Red Bull was from Nathan and Duga. And Nathan writes, did Perez's Red Bull career flash before his eyes as he narrowly missed taking out his teammate at the start? I mean, did you see how close Perez got, Courtney? Like, that was absolutely crazy. It's amazing he didn't hit anyone. Well played, Carlos Sainz and Leclerc and Lando Norris, to make sure they got out of the way of that charging Red Bull. But yeah, what was that start about by Perez?
Just rash, and I don't know why he did it, because the start to the season that Perez has had. Of course, he'd want to be challenging Max. Of course, he'd want to be challenging for a world championship. But his Red Bull seat isn't actually highly at risk compared to how it's been last season. The main risk was Danny Rick. He had a great sprint race, which I'm sure we will go into later on. But Perez has still been doing enough in terms of race results So I don't understand why he felt the need to make such a rash move. But I think that the lock up of his tyres would have already unsettled his race strategy. So that probably played a part in why Sergio Perez struggled so much.
Yeah, it was a tough weekend for Perez, and I think it kind of culminates the issues Red Bull were having, that the advantage just wasn't there for them. Maybe Miami was a circuit that they're not as strong at as they are at others. I mean, last year was a completely different story, but things obviously are a bit different now. So it's no surprise that Perez wasn't exactly right behind his teammate and dominating the way that we have seen him do this season. So yeah, tough weekend for him. Was it P3 in the sprint, P5 in the main race, and it was P6 on the road, but obviously inherited that from a penalty from Carlos Sainz later on, which we'll talk about. So yeah, could have been worse, but it's not the worst weekend in the world for Perez. But as I said, narrowly avoiding his teammate, and that would have certainly created headlines if he'd have hit Verstappen and taken him and himself probably out of the race as well. We should talk a little bit about Charles Leclerc, seeing as he came in third. And not a bad weekend for Leclerc. Second in the sprint race, third in the main race. Could have been more, but I think you'd have offered that to him. He probably would have been quite happy with that result this weekend.
Yeah, look, he got the maximum result for the team. But Charles Leclerc is one of those drivers I've been alluding to several times in this episode. He's one of the drivers that I just want to see be given the machinery to challenge for a world championship. We haven't seen the best of this guy yet. He of course he's got the best out of the current Ferrari that he has, but I'm really hoping we see this lad at that level challenging for a world championship. Because of the dominance we've been seeing, sometimes we forget that we have a very, very talented generation here. So he's very much in that mix, and don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but I do feel that Charles Leclerc's been underestimated next season when Lewis moves there. I think some people have this sort of idea. I think some people are getting carried away by saying, "Oh yeah, Adrian Newey straight off to Ferrari, and Lewis is going to go for his eighth world championship." If that Ferrari car is capable of challenging for a world championship, Charles Leclerc will be there. Like let's not forget that.
No, absolutely right. He had a good weekend, Leclerc. I don't think it was spectacular, but I think it's that 95 out of 100, if you want
Yeah,
to score it, that he's been doing quite a lot. Obviously, this season it's been a bit up and down for different reasons, but he is starting to find that rhythm where he's getting a bit more out of the car, he's getting more consistency, and I think as you're seeing that, a lot of people were sort of joking around saying, oh, Ferrari got rid of the wrong driver. I think you're seeing now that Leclerc is having less of those up and down weekends that he used to. And, you know, it's all coming together for him in the right way for Ferrari. As I said already, I think a lot has to be said for Ferrari to praise them for the fact that other than a few minor car updates, they haven't really upgraded this car at all yet. This is still the base version that we saw, or not even the launch spec, it's probably the testing version that we saw in Bahrain, minus a few minor updates, whereas Red Bull have had a few bits, Mercedes have, Aston Martin have, McLaren obviously had the big, massive upgrade. So it bodes very well for Ferrari that they have a very solid base and foundation. They're still able to compete for race wins on merit. And when Imola comes around, everyone's going to be massively excited to see what they've got cooking, because this is a big upgrade they've got planned. And, you know, if it has the same impact for Ferrari that we saw for McLaren this weekend, that's obviously going to bode very well for them. We should talk now, Courtney, about Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri, whose races were very much intertwined between each other for very different reasons. And I think the best way to talk about it is going through the incidents themselves. And we had a lot of questions related to Sainz and Oscar Piastri. Simply put, the question we had for a lot of people was, what did we make of those incidents? So let's talk about the first one, where Oscar Piastri was defending on the inside of Carlos Sainz. Carlos was trying to go around the outside in the sort of slow section, the left to right. I think, was it turn 10? I think it was. And Oscar Piastri, obviously on the inside of the apex, Carlos Sainz a little bit alongside him, and they make a little bit of contact. I think it's fair to say Oscar goes quite deep, forces Carlos to go wide off the road. Carlos was very unhappy about that, wanted Oscar to give back the position, was saying he should have had a penalty. The stewards didn't agree. They thought it was hard but fair. What was your take on that one, Courtney? Do you think that was the right call?
yeah. I think both drivers were frustrated with how their races were going. I think Oscar Piastri, was having a sniff of the win at one point. And look, let's not forget the turmoil that Carlos Sainz is going the lad is fighting for his F1 career. So if he feels that something is going against him, he's going to feel that more than a lot of the drivers on the grid. So I feel that the tussles that we saw between the two drivers were the two drivers that were frustrated for different reasons, and they've come together on track. And these things happen. And look, let's be honest, it's one of the reasons why we love the sport. People are going to have different opinions, but we love these kind of debates. So the more of these kind of incidents we see, as long as they keep it right on the line, don't do anything too rash like we've seen from Kevin Magnussen this weekend. These are the moments that we love to see. I love to see it.
Yeah, it was nice to see Oscar get the elbows out. Admittedly, and I want to try and be as objective as possible here, being a Ferrari fan, and shock here, I don't agree with it necessarily being fair. I think hard racing is always good to see. I think it was very much on the line. I think you could go one way or the other with this, where you think it was good or a bit too much. The fact that they do make contact, which I think is initiated by the fact that Oscar has gone too deep into the corner, albeit he still kept it under control to a large degree and has kept it within the white lines. And I think there is a lot that needs to be said for that goes in his favour. But for me, if you're making contact with a guy on the outside, and let's be honest here, I know the nature of that corner means that if you're on the outside, unless you're obviously ahead of the guy on the inside, you shouldn't be expected to, make that move stick. But I think in that moment, I saw a lot of people trying to freeze frame it to say Oscar's got the apex, he's ahead of Carlos at the apex, something like that. But they're both braking from 200 miles an hour. Oscar's defending because he knows Carlos has the DRS in that situation. He's obviously going to brake a lot later than Carlos is because he's approaching the corner at a lower speed than Carlos is technically. So he can afford to brake a bit later and make up that ground. Those are the things you have to take into consideration, not necessarily a freeze frame that says, oh, well, what he did afterwards was legitimate. I just don't like the idea, the way the stewards have made the regulations on overtaking cars or fighting, that if you're on the outside and you're equally alongside the other car, that the expectation is the guy on the inside can just run you off the road. I think we saw a few instances with that. I think Lance Stroll got involved with Alex Albon or something like that. We also saw an incident where Hamilton and Leclerc were quite close together and they both navigated the corner. Okay, maybe Hamilton knew Leclerc had the better tyres, so he was like, you know what, it's fine, I'm not racing you, you can just go. And some people think, well, you need to be able to defend better than that. I don't know. And then we saw Magnussen and Hamilton and all that chaos in the sprint. But my point is, I do think that, to make it hard and fair, I don't think it should be considered fair if you have to run the other guy off the road to keep position. Unless, of course, he's a long way back and he's making a silly lunge around the outside. By all means, that's fair game. But that wasn't what happened here. They were alongside each other. So I think Carlos should have been afforded a bit more room. But I don't think it should have been a penalty. And I'm glad the stewards didn't get involved and tell Oscar, oh, you have to give the place up to Carlos, despite the fact he was moaning about it and Ferrari obviously reported it. I'm glad they didn't do that. But as I said, it can go either way. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I just think it's very, very close on that line. Some people will say it's fine. Some people like myself think, maybe it was a bit much.
No, you put it perfectly. And going back to the very point about the things we love about this sport, this is one of them. I love these moments where the drivers really go for it, and it does leave that grey area, and it makes our jobs making a podcast a hell of a lot easier as well, doesn't it, Adam? Because there's plenty to talk about, so that's what it's all about.
Oh, absolutely. And this is going to be one of the video ones that we do on YouTube. We always do the race reviews on YouTube as well. So I'm sure plenty of you will have your own opinions, and not just of what we've said, but your opinions on the incident as well. So get them in the comment section. I'd be very curious to see how a lot of you guys saw that, whether you agree with us or whether you think that I'm absolutely washed and don't know what I'm talking about. Doesn't really matter. Love to hear what you guys think. Talking about the other incident, Courtney, between Sainz and Piastri, obviously at the penultimate corner at the hairpin, Sainz goes down the inside of Piastri to try and overtake him, loses control of the rear end, makes contact with Piastri. The stewards did deem that a 5-second time penalty, which demoted Carlos Sainz back into, 6th place at the end of the race. I personally think this one is a lot more simple, and that Carlos loses control under braking,
yes,
initiates the contact with Oscar. It's not a fair move at all, and I think it's a deserved penalty, but I'm glad they didn't go with what they have done and give a 10-second time penalty and a bunch of penalty points, because I don't think that would have been a fair penalty either, but it definitely was worthy of a penalty.
No, absolutely. And what we saw there was, once again, just frustrations building up, and it always reaches boiling point eventually, and that's what we got. But you're right. I'm glad they didn't give too much of a harsh penalty. I think where Carlos finished in the end probably was where he should have finished. All things considered, it's just very harsh on Oscar to have his race ruined like that. But he will learn from this. He's still young. I think sometimes we forget that he's only been in the sport for a couple of seasons now. And I do feel he's very much an underestimated driver. So he will learn from this, and it will make him a more complete driver.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be wrong in saying that this was probably Oscar Piastri's best drive over the whole weekend. I think his qualifying performance was pretty good. He was handy in the sprint race. He was great at the early stages of the main race where he got ahead of Leclerc, took advantage of that crazy start where he appeared out of nowhere, overtakes Sainz, then gets Leclerc and is going after Max. He was handling the race pretty well. Unfortunate with the timing of the safety car. Obviously, it benefited his teammate immensely, but it was a bit unfortunate for him. And, he obviously, the defensive driving, again, whether that's too aggressive or not, I don't know. That's up for people to have their own opinion on. But I liked seeing Oscar in the mix. And I think this is part of his education that you talked about earlier, that he's going to get better and better. He's mixing it up with the best drivers in the sport right now in the best machinery. And he's certainly not looking out of place. So it is a shame that his race was ruined by that second incident with Carlos Sainz. Also, it was a bit frustrating for him that he got the fastest lap of the race, but I think he took that off his teammate. So he ended up losing a point for the team because he was outside the top 10. So I don't think McLaren will care about that too much in the grand scheme of things. But it just, the second half of the race just completely went against Oscar, unfortunately, and it just put a blotch on an otherwise decent performance this weekend from him.
Yeah, I think McLaren should be really satisfied with both of their drivers, and it bodes well. It bodes well. We know that Red Bull will be faster. We know that Ferrari have got this really interesting, massive upgrade coming. But I'm really glad to see McLaren going in a direction they're heading. You just want to see as many teams up there competing for a race win. So long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting point I wanted to bring up quickly. Did you see hear the radio message that Carlos Sainz had with his engineer, Ricky, at the end of the race? They were saying basically like one more lap and we would have won that. And a lot of people were saying, one more lap, you finished fifth. Like, what are you on about? I think that was a bit misunderstood, because what he was talking about was much earlier in the race, whereas Carlos Sainz pitted on lap 28 and came out of the pits literally less than half a lap later. K-Mag and Sargent have that collision which caused a safety car. Now, if they'd have waited another lap, which I think they were trying to wait for a safety car, but I think they just gave up the ghost and said, look, it's not going to happen. We need to pit, otherwise we're going to lose ground to Oscar Piastri and Perez. And if they'd have kept him out, he would have effectively had the lead of the race because he was ahead of Lando on the road. So that's what I think they meant. I genuinely don't think Carlos Sainz would have pulled out this incredible pace to find 15 seconds and pass 4 cars and factor in a 5-second time penalty that he was yet to serve to then win the Grand Prix all in one lap. I mean, if he had that pace, and I'd be like, where the hell was this the last 57 laps? That's
the thing. It's spot on. But again, it's the luck that comes with strategy surrounding a safety car. And it's one of safety cars, very much divide opinion, but they do spice up races. And there are so many outcomes that come from a safety car, and what you just said there with Carlos Sainz is very much an example of that. So I'm just very happy with how everything worked out.
Yeah, and he knows how to put himself in the right position when that happens. I mean, his first win at Silverstone a couple of years ago was a prime example of that, of how you can put yourself in the right position to benefit in that situation. So, not to be today, but, plenty to learn from that. Last question we got before we move on to other teams, Courtney. Martina Sanchez, and this is a good question from Martina, so thanks for this one, Martina. With McLaren's upgrades giving Lando his first win and Ferrari's eagerly anticipated 2.0 version of the SF24 coming in Imola, do you think they will now be able to challenge Red Bull and Max for the championship and breathe new life into this 2024 season? Well, this is the question where we're going to get ahead of ourselves, if any, Courtney, isn't it?
Very much, as I said earlier on, big dose of copium going on. I'm going to be bold. I'm going to say there could be a closer challenge for the constructors. I think Perez was a little bit wobbly this weekend. There could be a challenge for the constructors, but I still think Max Verstappen will easily win this championship. Maybe he won't win it before the summer break this year. Maybe he'll win it. Maybe he'll win it with, I don't know, 5 races to go rather than 7.
Well, the only way they're moving the needle at the moment to make it more exciting is just add more races, because theoretically it takes longer to win it mathematically. Do you remember the days of Michael Schumacher where he used to win it before the summer break or something, when he had about 14 races on the calendar? Like nowadays, obviously, not so much.
Didn't Nigel Mansell win it in Hungary?
Yeah,
In 92?
usually that's the one, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
Hungary, it's usually around August time, or just
Hungary, Spa.
yeah, like the first race after the summer break or something like that, and it's over. But again, that's when we had like 16 races on the calendar. We have like 25 now or something crazy like that, and sprint races as well to boot. So it's not as straightforward as it used to be anymore. And we get points for fastest lap. We never used to back in those days get points for fastest lap. And the points tallies, there was less points on offer, or in terms of less of a swing if you won races. So that obviously made it a lot easier to win it early too. No, do you know what? I agree with you to an extent. I think Miami obviously is going to paint a picture where that does seem like it could happen. And I think we're all really excited. We all hope that it happens. But we do have to be fair to Red Bull here. And this was definitely a circuit, in my opinion, where Red Bull weren't able to extract the best out of their car, or they were going to struggle at, which obviously brought the likes of McLaren and Ferrari closer to them. I mean, look at towards the back end of the race. Hamilton, in the dog of a Mercedes that he was driving, was harrying Perez. That just shows how Red Bull's advantage was not there like it has been at other circuits. And we saw this in Melbourne to a degree. We saw Singapore last year, how that can go wrong for them. So, that can happen sometimes. We have to factor that in. McLaren have obviously brought in this huge upgrade package for Lando, and the fact that they weren't able to give Oscar the full car either suggests that this was ahead of schedule. And it was very much out of sync to the huge upgrades that we're expecting from Ferrari. But also we have to consider that Red Bull have got an upgrade package of their own to add on to their car. We can't just expect them to sit still. I mean, if they did, that would be great for the competition, but we know that's not going to happen. So I don't want to get carried away yet. I do think the way the championship is right now, that it's still close enough that if the likes of Ferrari and McLaren can challenge Red Bull for race wins at most of the circuits left, if not all of them, then there is a chance that we could get an incredible second half of the championship. But like you, Courtney, I think we have to be fair to Red Bull here. We have to be fair to Max Verstappen. And the statistics and the history and the reputation does suggest that the others will get closer, but not close enough. And that's probably the most likely outcome at this point in time.
Yeah, we saw it particularly during Vettel's dominance. I think it was 2011. I think. Yeah, wasn't it when you had like 7 different drivers? Is that 2010?
It was 20. I think that was it 2012? I think it was. Or 2013 when, I think, no, not 2013. It might have been 2012. I can't remember the year exactly, but you're right. It had like a lot of different winners, including Maldonado, GOAT. And
that's it. Yeah. I remember it. It was like a close-ish championship. And then you got the Spa. And I think Lewis was on pole. Vettel was second. It's like, oh, here we go. We might actually have a championship battle here. He got past Lewis on the Camel Straight, first lap, didn't look back for the rest of the season. So we know Red Bull have that capability of just out of nowhere switching it, and you have complete dominance once again. So let's just take it one race at a time.
Yeah, he won like 8 or 9 in a row or something crazy like that. I think, was it like they brought a new floor and a new front wing and they found half a second. Everyone's like, oh, for goodness sake. Like, Adrian, pack it up for a day. Like, honestly. But
he is now.
He is now. It took a while, but that day is very fast approaching now. Just didn't realise at the time it was going to be another 14 odd years. Anyway, I digress. But no, I think that's probably fair. We have to still expect Red Bull to be the team to beat, but the margin is getting smaller. And as you pointed out, Courtney, we're now seeing that Red Bull, they can't even be at 90 or 80% capacity to win races now. They have to be on it, or they're going to be at risk of losing out.
And that is encouraging moving forward. Look, you don't want to take anything away from Red Bull and Max in particular. I know it might seem that way, particularly when I go on my rambles, but you just want to be seeing. You want to go into a race weekend not knowing who's going to win. I think that's, and I think that is a fair point to make. It doesn't matter what sport it is. Like, obviously, Adam, as an Arsenal fan or as a West Ham fan, I love the idea of knowing that West Ham are going to win every week. But if it's not your team or it's not your driver, you're not going to be thrilled going into a race weekend knowing who's going to win. So that unknown will make it so much more interesting for casual fans in particular to engage with the sport again.
But in the short term, we could always hope that West Ham beat Man City on the final day of the season and Arsenal
Not
win the
happening.
Premier League this year.
Not happening. You have to rely on Fulham, mate. Don't look at West Ham. Not happening.
Yeah, do you know what? I mean, football stuff aside, we can live in hope. That's all I can say. But we'll stick to the Formula One. I'm sure our listeners will probably agree with that. Let's talk about Aston Martin and Mercedes. We got a lot of questions about them, but I think the best one we got was from David Bowden. And David basically writes, what happened to Aston Martin and Mercedes? It feels like even though they were hanging on the coattails of the likes of Ferrari, McLaren, and even Red Bull to the point where, they were starting to slip away, I don't think I've ever seen them as far away from the front, especially the Aston Martins, as they have been all season. Can you explain? Well, I mean, David, I think it's a fair point, and I think it's a fair question. I'm a bit surprised that Aston Martin and Mercedes, other than Hamilton, Harry and Perez towards the end of the race, and they were both on mediums, so it wasn't exactly like Lewis had better tyres than Perez. They were both on the same compound of tyres, and I think Lewis's were slightly used as well. He didn't have fresh mediums, I think, if I remember right. So, other than that, yeah, Aston and Mercedes were nowhere this weekend. George Russell, if George Russell hadn't done that hot lap with Ed Sheeran, I'd have forgotten he was there this weekend, to be honest. And yeah.
But I do feel sorry for George Russell. I think he's another driver that's coming under a lot of criticism. But what can he do? I feel that Mercedes are sort of, they're in their own league, in a sense. They sort of just swindle away on their own. But I would say I'm more miffed about Aston Martin because they've had a couple of encouraging weekends, but we saw this last season. They started really well, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. We expect to see Lance Stroll. I'm probably going to get grief for another person bullying Lance Stroll. You expect to see Lance Stroll down there in 13th, 14th, but to see Fernando Alonso, we know how good Fernando is, struggling to get him to the points. It just shows that Aston Martin aren't quite there yet, and I think the Mercedes are in so much trouble. They're losing their star man. We've heard a lot of reports that they're having problems with their software. If you can't rely on your software to develop a good car, then it just shows there's a lot of head scratching going on at that team, and they better hope they get the 2026 regulations right, because you just worry that they could end up winning the way that we saw with McLaren in the early years of the hybrid era.
Yeah, no, I'm a bit worried about them too, because, you look at the problems that they had last year and the problems the other teams had around them. It was a case of, all right, other than Red Bull, everybody's kind of in the same boat, so it's not so bad. Fast forward to 2024, Ferrari have figured this out. McLaren have figured this out. Aston Martin, in a weird way, kind of look in a better place than Mercedes do going forward. They're not questioning themselves. They obviously know where to fix things, but obviously about getting that done compared to the others is still a challenge for them until they're operating at full capacity. Mercedes, on the other hand, are talking it up, thinking that, we're going to figure this out. But I'll be honest with you, mate, it's getting harder and harder to really believe that they're going to do that. And on top of all of that as well, we have to factor this in. The fact that they haven't figured this out yet means that no matter what they do, they're going to be falling further behind the others before they start catching them up. As I said, McLaren have made huge strides this weekend. Ferrari look like they're going to make a big step forward next time out in Imola. Red Bull obviously going to stretch the bar or raise the bar even higher when they put their upgrades on. Mercedes at this point in time, they're still scratching their head. They're still questioning their software. They're still questioning this, that and everything else. And like you said, George Russell was asked, I think, before the race, what his thoughts on some comments from Hulkenberg about, he'd like to mix it with the Mercs. And George said, well, I'd like to mix it with the Red Bulls. Well, do you know what? The way things are going, I think the Mercs are going to have to get used to seeing the sight of the Hasses, because those are the guys that they're fighting at the moment, them and the Astons. They're not in the same league as the McLarens or the Ferraris, let alone the Red Bulls at this point in time. And that is a very sobering and somber thought for Mercedes.
You have to look at Williams. Williams were, in the particularly in the 80s and the 90s, they were one of the biggest forces in Formula One. And if you don't keep to a certain level, you can find yourself falling down the grid. You cannot rest on your laurels, particularly in this sport where a tenth of a second makes the world of difference. Mercedes really need to get their act together, or their issues will continue to worsen.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Next question we got from Andre F1. Andre writes, the Kevin Magnussen situation is just getting ridiculous now. It was funny at first, but it feels like every single race he is getting penalties for not only doing silly things, but also, more importantly, poor driving standards and taking people out. Surely he's not far away from a race ban. Well, Andre, he's not far away from a race ban. He's got 10 penalty points on his super license now. So if he has another incident, which I think each one is worth like 2 or 3 points now, Courtney, it's quite strict. If he has another clash with someone, he's getting a race ban. And I'm with Andre on this one, Courtney. It was funny at first. I think Jeddah was a bit of S-housery. Don't want to swear on the pod.
Yeah.
But playing that team game, and he acknowledged that this is the game he has to play when he was talking about his incidents with Lewis Hamilton and accepting his blame for what he was doing. But we're at this point now where these incidents are happening all the time, and it's getting to a point of safety at this point. It's not even a case of, he's just, it's a bit silly or it's a bit immature. You can't put people in the wall like Logan Sargent in this incident and think that, that's just a normal, okay thing to do. If it's happening all the time, something does need to be done about it. The stewards did deliberate about Magnussen, his driving standards. Some of them were in favour of punishing him more, others weren't so much. So at this point, Courtney, I think it's just going to become a test of what Haas are going to tolerate, what the stewards are going to tolerate. Where do we go from here?
No, I think there's one thing looking at Magnussen's situation just from a pure racing punishment perspective, but also what the Haas think of this, because you've got to look back to when they removed Mick Schumacher. They got rid of Mick Schumacher because of the errors he was making and how costly it was, particularly in a cost cap era that we're now in. So you got Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg in, and we said that's a good lineup. They're reliable. They're long-term drivers. They'll get the results that a team of Haas's size desire. But now you've got one of your drivers. Well, one of said drivers is leaving already. Hülkenberg's going to I don't know what they're going to be called next year. Is it Audi next season?
It's going to be Sauber. Well, it's Sauber Kick or
yeah,
whatever the other one was. I can't remember. But yeah, it's going to be that, and then becomes Audi in 26.
So Hulkenberg's off, and then you've got the other driver who was seen as reliable, who's no longer that. They might as well bring Mick Schumacher back, if that's the case, because you removed Mick Schumacher for the errors he was making, despite having the pace on his day. But you got Magnussen, if anything, he's even worse because he's not just making errors, he's also impacting other drivers' races.
Well, Ayu Komatsu was asked about Ollie Behrman because Ollie Behrman's going to be doing a few more practice sessions, not just for Ferrari, but also for Haas as well. And Ayu was quite open in saying that, in terms of Ollie's education in Formula One, it's going to be much more crucial for him to do the practice running rather than what he would learn from F2. Maybe there's scope there at some point this season that if K-Mag is still doing this, maybe Ollie Behrman, if he impresses enough in those practice sessions, whenever he does them, may get a call up and drive maybe the second half of this season. Not suggesting that I'm putting that out there because I know something that others don't. I don't, but I think it's quite interesting that the team principal is making those comments in the wake of what's going on with K-Mag at the moment. So, yeah, we'll have to watch this space on this one, but yeah, something has to happen with what K-Mag is doing at the moment, because as I said, it was funny at first, but it's starting to push it a little bit now, and it's not really what you want to see. Final question before we sign off, Courtney, from Stephen Smith, and not the cricketer, and he writes, not a question, but I wanted to take the opportunity to give a massive shout out to both Yuki Tsunoda and Esteban Ocon. Incredible drives today. Well, let's start with Yuki Tsunoda, Courtney. Not just today, but yesterday as well, getting points in the sprint in P8 and a solid finish in P7 in the main race. And in that time, he was in there for like half the race, and he was holding off the competition really well. And the pace wasn't overly there for RB. They were struggling a little bit. All right, Daniel did a great job in the sprint, but when everybody, set their cars up properly and become more accustomed to the circuit, it looked like RB was falling away a little bit. But Yuki did an incredible job. And I've said this before, and I'll say this again, Courtney. When is this kid going to get his flowers? Because we're always talking about him at the moment as if he's fighting for his F1 career, but he is clearly proving, more so than he ever has done in his career, that this is a guy that's improving all the time. He's much more reliable now. He's more consistent, which was always something that he really lacked despite the pace that he has. And he's putting it all together week after week now. And if he has a bad week, he has one bad week, but then he'll put together another run of performances, and he's the one accruing all the points for the team right now. All right, Ricciardo did a great job in the sprint, but Yuki's responded to that as well. And he said, well, okay, you can do that, but then I'll do it on the Sunday.
Well, we've been very critical of Yuki Tsunoda in the past, and rightly so, when he was making a lot of costly errors. But he's no longer doing that. He's now becoming more of a complete driver. It's now his, third or fourth season in Formula One. But at one point, was like, look, come on, you can't be doing this. You've been in the sport for 2 or 3 years now. But he's now, as you said, Adam, becoming a lot more consistent. He has become the main guy at the team. When look, we all expected Danny Rick to have a short stay with the RBV car, whatever they're called now, and challenge for the Red Bull seat. And now Yuki Tsunoda's sort of gone, well, no, where's my name? I want to be in the mix. I think the unfortunate thing for Yuki is I feel that the political situation at Red Bull with the Honda, the changes happening with Honda, I think he might well be fighting for a seat at Aston Martin. I think that's another situation to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think he's done a great job this season, and some of these drivers get the rough end of the deal because the sport's so political. But Yuki Tsunoda is definitely doing all the right things at the moment.
He certainly is. And I hope a lot of people are waking up to start realising that. And I'm hoping that if there isn't an opportunity for him at RB next season, and let's be real, we know Red Bull aren't that interested, he will be able to find a seat somewhere else. Because I'd hate to see him fall out of the sport when he deserves to be here. I think he's earned that right this season already, and he did that for a lot last season too. So hopefully that form continues and people can start to wake up and notice that this is actually a good Formula One driver, a very solid one as well at this point in time. Obviously, we've got to talk about Esteban Ocon, as Stephen rightly pointed out. And yeah, in the midst of what has proven to be one of Alpine/Renault's toughest Formula One seasons to date in terms of the first few races, they are slowly making progress. Ocon and Gasly are driving very, very well. And Ocon was the one getting the crucial championship point, which I believe puts him into P8 in the Constructors' Championship, ahead of Williams and Sauber, which in terms of prize money is obviously very important. But yeah, fantastic drive from Esteban Ocon. If you'd have seen his Instagram, Courtney, the way he was celebrating, having pictures of everyone, if you hadn't seen the race, you'd have thought he'd have won it rather than Lando Norris. He was celebrating it that much. So, good for him.
Oh, it is a win for the team. There's been, it's been so highly documented, and rightly so, how a team that has the history and the resources should really be at the top end of the midfield at the very least. They haven't done that. They come under a lot of scrutiny. But I think we can say with both Ocon and Gasly that we know that they have that on their day. They have the ability to get these great results for the team they're driving for. It was also great to see them battling right on the edge at the beginning of the race. There were lunges happening on parts of the track that I didn't think was possible, but it was great entertainment. So I really do feel this Miami Grand Prix was a great success. I've said it at the very beginning of the episode. I've been very critical of it, but I think a lot of the drivers really went for it in this race, and it's good for the sport. This race was a very good advertisement for Formula One.
Yeah, there was action up and down the field, and it was quite close. Nobody was obviously running away. I know the safety car brought people back in to kind of make that a bit more exciting. The two Alpines had a great little battle at the start of the race. Courtney, I don't know if you
That's what I was alluding to, yeah.
Yeah. It was, just as they... At that point, I thought to myself, oh my God, are we going to get a moment where a particular airline company is going to have a brilliant marketing placement for where two Alpines have binned it in the advertising board next to them? But no, they kept it clean. Gasly and Ocon went about the races pretty well. Ocon getting the point. Gasly in P12 as well. So, Alpine were there on merit. This was no means lucky by any stretch of the imagination. And look, we were all sort of laughing and joking at their expense at the start of the season, but they are making steps forward. I'm hoping that this is the project and the plan that they'll commit to for the next few years and into the next regulation set as well. And, long may that continue. You don't want to see anyone falling further behind. And Alpine, obviously, this has been quite sobering for them, but they're starting to look better. Still got a long way to go, but they are making progress, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. You want to be seeing the big names up there.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that's all we've got time for in this episode. Thank you all so much for your questions. If you've got more questions you want to send in to us, let us know at DNF1_official on Twitter. And of course, you can contact us on our Instagram page as well, and also our email if you've got any more questions for the show. We'll leave those all in the show notes. As I said already, thanks for leaving us a 5-star review. A8 Grafter, this episode was for you. If you want a review read out on the show, make sure to leave us one on your favourite podcasting platform. It really does help us out, guys, and we're really grateful for your support, so please do keep them coming. But until then, guys, thanks for tuning in as always. We're back with some more content before the Imola Grand Prix in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, guys, thanks as always. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.